of Frank as somebody who was like so crazy to like get tight with the Kennedys, when in fact his circle, someone said to me, don't portray him in any way as this kind of guy, because his diction was beautiful.
That's
he
right.
would go to Monaco. He would hang out with Rosalind Russell. I mean,
absolutely.
in the way he has been portrayed, you don't really see that he traveled in all of these circles that most movie stars didn't travel in at all.
No.
I mean, even Tony Curtis, was the first one to tell you he was not in that circle.
That's right.
And so it wasn't like, Frank had other guys that he liked to hang out with. There's no doubt about the fact that the guys from his past. Because we also have footage of him. He's notorious for not going to funerals, but we have him as a pallbearer to his old friend Skinny D'Amato. He actually did go there and carry.
And what year was that, roughly?
76.
No kidding, really.
So, he was a very complicated person, and he had a whole other world of people.
Yeah, but you see, Frank Sinatra, being Frank Sinatra, would be a very tough assignment. And we don't know what he had to go through. For instance, if he had to go to a funeral, I would think he would know. Everybody's watching him. When you are under a magnifying glass or a microscope every second of the day you live, that's awful tough to cope with.
Right.
So I would.
He was so bitter about the press, and if you really go into what happened to him with the result of it, I don't think he ever counted on the tremendous backlash. I think George Evans knew, but I don't think he ever counted on the fact that they'd torture him for all those years.
Torture him for what? For leaving Ava? For leaving Nancy? For being Frank Sinatra?
Right, all of it. Well, of the time when he left Nancy and he was with Ava, I think and we make a big thing of it in the show, which is that part is already mastered. That you have to really understand the times to understand the flack that
you
took.
Absolutely have to understand the times with whatever you're discussing.
Right.
But that is very, very important to know that. And the fact that Frank lived, this sounds like a documentary on Frank, I know, and not the Rat Pack. Again, we're back to Frank.
Right.
But Frank lived the way no one else has lived or can live, to be as powerful in all circles, as you say, and you bring up the Catholic Church. Cardinal Spellman or whoever was a buddy. He was just so, you see, he was so respected, Frank was, in all arenas, that he could call on anyone or call to anyone.
But it's also a sense of himself, because even when he was down, in his mind, he was always who he was. And that's the incredible
When he was down, he was pretty down. I didn't know him then, but he talked a little bit about it.
But even, you can watch old footage. Everybody's got the joke about him being thin. Joey Bishop, and in this corner weighing 100 pounds. That's another interesting thing, that he was so big, but he was really so small. One guy said, in Vegas, they'd say, if I ever got in trouble, got in a fight, I'd want Frank at my back. And this guy says, what are you, crazy? Him?
I want a blanket to cover my head so I could get out of
But he exuded this power, even though he was not physically.
He was slight. He wasn't small. He was slight. He was a boxer. He studied boxing. You must have got that from your other people.
Absolutely.
And he loved to talk about how he boxed, and he loved it. And his daddy boxed, and so Frank carried himself like somebody who could knock the hell out of you, and that also, that made him appear a bigger person, but he was quite slight. But he didn't waste any muscle. It was all in the right places. So whereas he was thin, he was strong. It's almost a wiry kind of strong, very, very. And the way his walk was always that of a cocky fighter. When you study it.
Well, one guy said that everybody liked him because he never knew what was going to happen. Even Milton Berle said, you know, he never went out with Frank where something didn't happen. It was just like something, whether you got in a fight in the men's room or whatever, something always happened.
That wouldn't be why you liked him, but that might be why he was extra fascinating. I mean, you wouldn't say, let's go with Frank, something might happen. You would be, it would be just a bonus for the night. He was unpredictable, and he was capable of pulling off anything he wanted to do. I mean, you know, that let's call President Roosevelt. I'm sure he could do things like that. You know, he had the guts and also had the entree to so many people in the world.
You know,
But another thing you brought up earlier that I wanted to comment on, you know, there was nobody who was a better pal to you if you were a pal. For instance, he was so close to Jilly Brizo for all those years. Now he loved just being in his company, which I can understand why.
excuse me, there's something going on.
Something backing up.
Yeah, it's
They're backing up.
garbage truck.
Yeah.
You know, maybe you're the person, I've been trying to figure out what the legacy, you know, there's so much about the Rat Pack, but in their day, they never made it to the cover of Look or Life. They made it to the cover of Ebony. People don't realize that in 1960, the country was really split down
yeah.
the middle.
Mhm.
Being liberal was not what it is considered today, being liberal. You were really out there. I mean, if you were supporting
Civil
Sammy
rights.
Davis's right to live in Hollywood or his
Mhm.
right to stay at the Sands Hotel,
Mhm.
that was a very big departure then.
Mhm.
And show business people led that. You know, I mean, they used their fame to try to tell people that
That's
this
right.
this is the way it should be.
That's right.
Can you talk about what you think I mean, because their legacy is not just the fact that they were fine entertainers, I don't think.
Oh, no, not at all.
I mean, it's like the Kennedy legacy. It's like no matter how much mud they throw on the Kennedys, they're still at the top of everybody's list. Do you know what I'm saying?
Sure.
It's like you can't destroy that.
No. Well, I know that Frank, again, is responsible for Vegas, what it is today, and what the blacks are today. When he said, I won't perform unless Sammy can stay in this hotel too, they had to let him in. He was the groundbreaker. I even went through it myself, and I was nobody. I was to take my picture with Nat Cole in Miami. I was on a promotional tour because before all the television and all the satellites, you went to cities and did local shows. And I had done a movie with Nat in '57, I think, and this was after, now that I remember. And the press person from the studio asked me not to do that.
Janet
I
told
was
me
shocked.
that too. She said she'd always call ahead if she were having dinner with Sammy. She'd call ahead, and she said, I can't tell you how many times, because I didn't want to be embarrassed. I would mention that Sammy Davis was coming with me, and they'd say, oh, sorry, we don't.
Yeah, I'm not surprised to hear that. So you see, I think, again, things that are subliminally sent out, messages that are sent out from Hollywood or wherever, that was a strong message, and it did coincide with the civil rights movement. And when you have something as powerful as the Rat Pack, now mind you, they weren't that powerful in 1960. That grew. The Rat Pack syndrome grew later on to be much bigger than it was at the time. But the fact that they were performing, Sammy was a part of them, was at the same time we were saying the blacks have every right to be a part of this civilization. You know, who knows what the impact was. I think it was very strong. We'll never be able to measure it, but I think it's very strong.
So much has been made of the fact that Sinatra was responsible for Kennedy getting elected because of his connections with underworld people. But I personally think that he was responsible for his getting elected in all those other states outside of Illinois because of all of the appearances. I mean, who could even calculate the votes that they picked up for him in the rest of the country.
It's funny you should say that. I always took credit for that. Our little group that went out, we went to 7 Republican states because we didn't have to go to the Democratic states. We already had their vote. And we always jokingly said, we put them over the top. Dividing 7 by 110,000, we thought, well, we at least hit that many people. I think you're absolutely right that Frank's coming out for anybody would draw more attention to it. But on the other hand, if you really want to break it down, you also have the dissenters. Well, if Frank Sinatra's behind him, we sure don't want to be there. Or, well, Frank's Catholic too. You know, those who weren't around then forget or don't know how huge a deal it was that John F. Kennedy was Catholic. And so with every vote Frank got for him, he might have also lost for him. A lot of people didn't approve of Frank Sinatra. But I think there's no question he had an enormous influence. But in my opinion, really, it was the president who got himself elected. Those debates put him over the top more than any one person or one group or whatever. I think he got himself elected.
Well, nobody's ever even talked about their raising money for Martin Luther King, the Carnegie Hall concert. You can't even find a brochure on it. But they...
I don't even know what it is you're talking about.
Raising
money
and,
for...
Yeah, Frank and Sammy and Dean raised money for the Southern Christian Leadership Conference at Carnegie Hall in New York.
Mm-hmm. There you get some more dissenters for doing that. Right. It's oddly enough, it could backfire as much as it could help. But
it's interesting that you say that the Rat Pack wasn't that at the time, because you're right. Their legacy. I mean, if you look at it, it's just a nightclub act.
That's right.
And one that didn't really. It happened over a very small period of time.
Absolutely.
But then it got to be.
Yes, because when you saw that great group worked together and then got glimpses of it as you went along, and I mean, it just in time they all became legends. So, it's it really wasn't that important. Now, had we had a lot of television in those days, had CNN and Extra and all those other shows been following it and showing it on the news, it might have even lessened it by me. But it was a very private, special time. Only the ones who were there got that great privilege of seeing that show. And then
their movies. I mean,
it grew and grew and grew.
Joey Bishop said to me, I hate this Rat Pack stuff. There never really was any Rat Pack. They didn't really like to hang out together. And then I asked some other people, and they said, well, Joey had a real problem. He didn't drink. And he didn't hang out. So, of course, he was never really there.
Well, it wouldn't even be because he didn't drink. It would just be that, you gel with some people and you don't with others. And Frank was the leader of the pack. There's no question about it. And if he had a blast with the three of them, and he just wanted to hang out with them, and if the other person, me included or Joey, didn't quite fit into their little fun moment, well, then why should we be around? No, I don't think you can't be a part of everything.
Why do you think that there are so few women that are connected with the Rat Pack? Curtis said to me, because it was a boys' club. They'd go from town to town. They'd pick up all their guy friends, guys like Frank knew in Chicago. Chicks were really not a part of it. But there are only in this whole show, it's all guys except you, Keely, and Janet. And maybe Shirley, if I can get her away from her grandchild to do one interview.
I hope you can get Shirley.
I know, but why so few of you, though? There are no
well,
names.
I read Patrice Wymore is in it. Her daughter just died. In case you were to contact her, can you imagine being found dead in your bed? That was Errol Flynn's daughter, and I just happened to read that. Now Patrice was in it, but I think again. Juliette Prowse was going with Frank at the time, if I remember correctly. She wasn't even a part of the pack, so it had nothing to do with. It's just that those, with whether you were married to one of them or their girlfriend or whatever, the guys enjoyed hanging out together. They loved, and why not? That's why I resent women trying to get on boys' basketball teams or baseball teams. Leave them alone. They have more fun without us. You go to the steam room together, you play cards together, and there's a time and a place for women, but they had more fun together. And I agree, though, they weren't together that much. It wasn't every night by any means, but when they did get together, they had a blast.
I think they did I think they had more fun together. I think they also, just from what I've observed of them, I don't think they really had great chops for dealing with women. So I think when the women weren't around, they were a lot more relaxed.
You mean they didn't know how to talk with women? Is that what you mean?
Well, I'm trying, like this show will end around 1967. I've been trying to write this thing that says, as soon as, free love came in, and the summer of free love, these guys who had didn't even know the concept of love being free because they had always, all the stories of how they would lavish things on women, they were not part of that. Once that generation came in, I don't think they made that transition very well.
Oh, no, and they shouldn't have.
Exactly.
And couldn't have, no.
Exactly.
But
I think that for them, they came from a background where if you just look at their relationships with their mothers, women were kind of mysterious, one guy said to me, he said, all of their lives, he knew Frank and Dean very, very close. He said, they never found the right woman. And Janet Leigh said, this is really remarkable. They had every woman you could ever imagine. And they're sitting around over drinks going, she never walked through the door. Whomever that was. But I think that was also part of their consciousness, don't you?
I'm not totally sure of what you said, so I don't say yes, I think it was part of their consciousness, because I, like you, I talk convoluted sometimes.
Sure.
I do think that they were from the old school of guys did things together. You play ball together, you play golf together, you hang out at the pool hall together. Guys did guy things, and when it came time to be with the women, then they were great. But they were, I think, I've been at more parties where a woman has ruined a dinner party, because the guys are saying something very interesting and then she starts talking about lampshades. And so a lot of women don't deserve to be in their group. They're stupid and they don't know how to listen. They always want to talk. Now, so if I were a guy in their midst, I wouldn't want those women around either until just the right time. So I think it was a practice of being, how can I say, not more comfortable, but they didn't have to have a pain in the ass at the table. A lot of women don't know how to behave.
But don't you think there was this concept that there was this one goddess that they would finally, don't you think that was the whole Frank and Ava thing, that it was
No.
like they had a dream girl?
No.
You don't?
No.
You think
No.
you think they had a better grasp on it?
Absolutely.
You do. That's interesting.
Yeah. No, I don't think they weren't torching and suffering any more than any of us. No, I just think that for instance, I have a better time sitting around with men than I do with women. It's just that I like their thinking, and I'm just more interested in what they're interested in than what most women, I say most women, and not so much today as 30 years ago when women didn't have careers. A non-career woman isn't all that interesting.
Yeah,
Yep.
I'm seeing a little white on the bottom there.
Oh, I'm sorry.
So, yeah, no, that's
It's
okay.
good. It's good you tell me.
Yeah.
Is this better?
It's
Yeah,
great.
that's much better.
It's great that
Thank
you say that, because that is exactly what Keely Smith told me. That's exactly what Janet Leigh told me.
Absolutely.
So you all do have a very common perception there about.
Good. Well, I feel mine is correct naturally, but it's just the mentality of many women. After all, their wives sat around being in the shadow, and they didn't talk about business. They talked about, diapers or lampshades or something. And to me, I would have been out the door too, playing pool with my buddies. That's more fun than hearing about. And I don't mean to say they weren't wonderful, the women, but they just, non-career women don't have enough to talk about all day and all night to make it interesting. So you want to be with your buddies.
Well, it's very interesting because somebody said a great thing about Sammy, that when Sammy would leave Vegas, say he'd have to have a meeting. Many times he wouldn't go home. He would go to a hotel, he would have his meetings and go back to Vegas. That imagine the seduction of being able to go to a place where you could be with all of your friends, where people adored you, and then try to stack that up against going home.
It's a killer.
It's a killer, right?
Absolutely. And it doesn't mean that the wife isn't wonderful. But how could I, and I couldn't, compete? We can't compete with the glamour and the excitement of what was the nightclub scene or the stage. No, you can't.
Or the adulation.
Well, that's part of it. That's part of the scene.
Imagine all that feedback from all those people who all they want to do is rub up against you.
I've lived with it. I've seen it in more cases than a few, and it's really tough. But that's something else again. That's another issue. That's another issue.
That's why you were described to me as being so smart and such a great survivor. Because I think that a lot of women, this is completely off the subject, but I think a lot of women got destroyed trying to compete with that. Do you know what I'm saying? That you just couldn't. I mean, it's just something that if you didn't understand that, you could get, very, very ground up.
I just know that I'd rather listen than talk when I'm with interesting people. And those 4 or 5 were the most interesting people who would, but as I say, I just think that guys get along on a movie set. I think they have a lot more fun, the crew does, when it's all men. Now, that doesn't mean women shouldn't work there. I think they should, but I'm saying from the man's point of view, I think they have more fun when there aren't women around, and much more so in the past.
Do you have any idea, and this is one of the constant mysteries to me, do you have any idea how these guys, none of them, ever even made it into high school? How did they become...
What guys never made it into high school?
Neither. Never finished high school.
Never finished.
Sammy Davis, perfect example, never even went to school a day in his life, yet he could stand and speak extemporaneously. How did that, do you have any clue as to how that happened? How they, is this just a God-given gift that they were able to be so articulate, funny, and, is it just inventing yourself? Do you think they were just their own invention? Because I'm
Probably a combination of all that you say. Mm-hmm. First of all, the stage is a great teacher, and they grow up probably faster than anyone else when you get out there and expose yourself. So they're already getting grounded. Do they have to know algebra? I guess not. It's nice to know it. I like to be able to measure something and have it come out even or something like that. But again, in the 40s, when they would have passed up school, it was a whole different time. A lot of kids, especially men, I think, didn't finish high school in that time. Let's see, Frank was born in 1915 or 17? 1917. No, so that wouldn't be a reason.
I just find
because
it so interesting because they're, I was just wondering about that because, we have a line in the opening that's, I can't remember exactly how the dialogue goes, but it says 5 men who never finished high school taught us so many things.
That's
and I
nice.
just keep thinking
That's really nice.
about
And you're
that.
sure they didn't? You're
No,
sure
they
that
didn't. I've checked
you
every
have
one of
checked
them.
it?
Mhm.
Wow.
In fact, Peter Lawford, who
That's-
everyone thought went to Oxford,
Yes.
he never even went to formal
Didn't
school.
finish high school?
He went to work parking cars when he was 15 years old
is-
in a poor area of
wow.
West Palm Beach.
And I read his autobiography, and I'd forgotten that.
Yeah.
But again, if they read a lot, and if they're interested, they read. And I think, as you say, it's God-given too. You're born with smarts. You're brought up with smarts. You're brought up with caring, warm, smart people who have survived, and they pass on those survival skills. I guess Joey didn't finish high school either.
No.
That is
Right
amazing.
into the army.
In fact, the
Well,
father
you see,
never
right
finished-
into the army
Right.
is what
Went to
I
World War
figured
II.
a lot of boys did
Right.
of that era.
Well, you know, the great thing, I was talking to Nick Tosches, who did that, spent 8.5 years on Dean's, and he said, Dean said, there wasn't anything for me there, but I remember that was a very prevalent thing. But if you look at their era, what was there for them there? They wanted to get out in the world and do things, you know. High school didn't hold a fascination for them, so I think that's very typical. But
And they
remember-
and they developed. I don't want to
Sure.
condone anything he said,
Right.
because I don't like his
Right.
writing. I don't care if you print it, but I mean, say it, use it. I know you won't, so I can say it.
Right.
So I don't want this to sound like I'm condoning anything he said. This is
Right,
separate
of
from him.
course.
The men at that time grew up faster because of the war that preceded them and the war that was encroaching. And 16 and 17, they were already, yes, deciding how they could get out and make a living and support the family or go save the country from the invasion. So it was a totally different point of view then. Now you need to go on to school to get a job. And there you went out and got jobs and didn't finish school. So again, you have to look at the times. And I don't think it was, as they say, that unique not to finish high school. And they probably went up to, they probably went within weeks or months.
Well, the thing that's interesting is that getting back to their legacy, you personally made a great transition into the 60s, almost came into your own at that point. And you weren't any kid when you met them,
No,
but
I was
compared to
22.
them, you
Mhm.
were.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think, or do you know of anything do you think the world just changed so drastically in the late 60s that they just stayed behind,
That who stayed behind?
Frank, especially Frank and Dean. I think Sammy tried to jump into the 60s because he was about 10 years younger. Peter Lawford tried, they didn't. But what was it about what happened in the 60s that kind of ended that era? Can you think of one thing?
That ended each one's career? You got to
Well,
be more
it's-
specific. I don't know quite what you're
basically the
getting
idea, like when we were trying to decide when to end the show, and what year we want to end it. Somebody said a very amusing thing, said it should end when they remove their tuxedos. Because you go into the late 60s, you see Frank and Dean and they're kind of in like Elvis outfits, in other words, they're trying to.
Sammy's in a Nehru jacket.
Yeah, they're
Oh,
trying
yeah.
to bridge that gap.
Uh-huh.
And so we kind of made up our minds that would be when we would end. In other words, we're not interested in their experiences after that.
Yeah.
In other words, and this has been a lot of conversation with A&E,
I think there's no question about that. I think what we talked about earlier, television,
Right.
changed
Exactly.
everything. It changed the existence of nightclubs.
Right. Because you see, Elvis didn't change anything.
No, Elvis
was-
started.
And Elvis and Frank, that all seemed to work. I think it was when.
Well,
the
Elvis did,
Beatles-
wait a minute, Elvis didn't change anything? Elvis changed
No, I think
everything.
he didn't change anything for them.
For
In other
them.
words, I
Oh,
don't
okay.
think I don't think that there was anything that maybe dated them. I think they got dated when it became,
No, I think Elvis dated them.
do.
Yes, I think Elvis changed a lot. absolutely. And Elvis came along right when television came along. Again, I fall back on what television did to change this country. Not for the better, not for the worse. It just changed. It's not a commentary about good or bad. I think when you have two things coinciding, the television medium and Elvis and the style of music changing, people didn't want to hear anymore the old-fashioned, which was not all that old-fashioned, but now it was, they didn't want a ballad. They wanted Hound Dog and all the imitators that did that kind of music too. And then you've got the advent of television really taking over, not just being existent, but really in everybody's home, where now nightclubs didn't exist. So where were they going to work, and where would they be seen?
Well, the other thing that Shecky Green said was, he said, you know, today, no one would ever even be able to get away with what they got away with. I mean, no one would be allowed in Vegas to wheel a bar onto the stage or anything like that. I mean, it was almost like they had a special identity, a special ride.
They made Vegas what it was in those days, and Vegas was very new. Didn't Vegas start about 1951 or 49 or something like that? Well, it was still very new by 65. And then when the corporate ownership and management came in, I just think not one person could be responsible for people on stage. I don't know. I'm talking in circles.
No,
I don't
you're
have
not.
the
The
it's
answer
just
to that.
no. I don't have the answer to that.
Well, one thing we sure know is that
Oh,
what seems dated today is like the 60s stuff, and yet you look at Sinatra and Dean, they seem strangely contemporary, where you look at the 60s stuff, and that's what's looking funny, maybe because of the hair, the
Right, like
style.
Austin Powers,
Right.
right?
You know, I don't know why that is.
They didn't, but they weren't. The hair changed with the Beatles, and that was in 1963 or 4. This is all before that. And so the 60s and 70s had a look. And the only good thing that came out of it was the miniskirt and long hair, of course, but in my opinion. But because they had not changed yet, it does look strangely contemporary. I agree with you. It all comes around, doesn't it? But whether or not they could get away with it in Vegas, it's already been done. Nobody tries to get away with it. Something that was new and special can't be new and special if it's already been done. So
Very true.
it's just that it's the just normal evolution.
Right.
But they'll never get a gang like that.
In closing, is there any story that you would like to get in this show that is a humorous story about your personal experiences with any of them? I mean, a funny thing that happened, something that
On the show?
doesn't matter, just something that, an incident
Well,
that you like included.
I mean, you should probably turn it off
Yeah.
because I'm going to take a while to think about that.
Yeah.
We will.
The show.
Well, when I think back to them, I just, no, I don't have a particular, I just thought of one. Wait a minute, let me run that through my head to see if I can tell it. No, can't tell that one. Let me see. No, I think, I was there in Vegas for a couple of weeks. I saw 9 of the shows. I saw them every night that I was there. And so when I think back to the Rat Pack, I just remember those times that were so good then. We were all pretty young, and tragedies hadn't befallen so many of us, and so it was just the most marvelous times of just total abandoned fun, abandon of emotion and just great fun. You know, for most of us, things all happened terrible after that time. So at that time was a great time in our lives. And so I just think of laughing and smiling and having it be the best time of our lives.
Yeah, it's a great hole.
That was great.
There it is.
Getting some of that fun from Tony Curtis, who is a trip and a
Oh,
half.
I know he is. Oh, he's so funny.
And difficult and everything.
Oh,
But
yeah.
he was funny. I mean,
Oh,
he
he's
told
very
really
funny. And he has a great memory. He remembers everything, too.
But it is
That's part of
It's
it.
just that idea that it was a very naive
It was.
time.
Frank's son was kidnapped later. The president was murdered later. Dean's son died later. I don't know about Joey's personal tragedies. I'm sure he's had them. Sammy always had a difficult life, just being a leader and you know, going to Nixon and just marrying a white girl. I mean, Sammy was always had little, how can I say, daring exploitations in his life. And but
Did you know my Brit at all?
I knew her only to say hi, how are you, and that kind of thing, and saw her at the funeral and things like that. But I can't say I didn't know her as well as I knew Altaviz.
I just think it's so symbolic that Frank was the one who stood up for Sammy. And
It's
was
wonderful. It's incredible. That's the kind of guy he was. But when you look at the, up to that time in 1959 or 60, the greatest tragedies of their lives had not come about yet. And so it was easier to have fun. And also, what better place to forget your tragedies than on stage, because that's why Edie Gourmet and Steve Lawrence, as you know, lost their son. And we play poker, and Edie says, you know, they say, what time should we quit? And we say, whatever. And she'll say, I could go all night because I forget everything right here, having fun at this table. And that's, I think, what they did too.
Yeah.
We have voices.
Yeah, it's all right.
Adam's getting antsy. And
We're gonna do.
I wouldn't be
you know,
lucky
as I
enough to
say,
be in
it's-
more
it's
than
like,
that.
There are.
okay, that's the end of the interview.